On live television, in front of millions, Senator J.D. Vance called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett ghetto, thinking it would shut her down. But what happened next left the entire panel speechless. Jasmine didn't flinch. She looked straight into the camera, took a breath, and delivered a response so powerful it's still echoing across America. Her words didn't just defend herself. They defended every woman who's ever been labeled, dismissed, or told to shrink. And the way she said it? Calm, unapologetic, unforgettable. If you believe dignity speaks louder than disrespect, hit like, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and subscribe now, because what Jasmine said next made history. From the outside, the set looked like every other political panel show. High ceilings, cool-toned lights, polished glass tables, 4 guests lined up in perfect symmetry, a moderator ready to steer the discussion. But if you were paying attention, really paying attention, you could feel it in the air. Tonight was going to turn. The conversation was supposed to be about economic recovery in underserved communities, nothing too volatile, a chance to toss out stats, share anecdotes, nod sagely. But sitting at the far right of the panel was Senator J.D. Vance, already shifting in his seat, eyes darting toward his notes, waiting for his moment to interrupt. On the other end sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, composed, still, not because she lacked opinion, but because she had learned over a lifetime that in rooms like this, sometimes silence hits harder than the loudest voice. J.D. Vance leaned into his mic, smirk ready. "Let's be serious," he began, waving one hand like swatting a fly. "Throwing money at bad schools and calling it reform isn't progress." His tone, smug, the kind that pretends to be logical but is laced with superiority. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, just barely, still didn't speak. So he went on, and on, talking about how government programs coddle failing neighborhoods, how emotional appeals cloud policy. Then finally, Jasmine spoke. Her voice was low, steady. "If by bad schools you mean the ones underfunded, ignored, and punished for the zip codes they sit in, then yeah, let's throw money at them. Let's throw all the money at the communities we've robbed and still expect greatness from." JD leaned back, chuckled to himself. Then came the moment that made the air stop moving. "You're just being ghetto," he said. Flat, careless, as if the word was punctuation, not poison. The host blinked twice. The panelists froze. And for half a breath, you could hear nothing but the hum of the studio lights. But Jasmine didn't blink. She adjusted her mic, looked directly into the camera, and said something that cracked the floor beneath them all. In that moment, what was supposed to be a routine panel turned into a lightning rod, a flashpoint for something far older and deeper than the topics on the rundown. J.D. Vance didn't just say a word. He pulled a thread that unraveled decades of dignity, decorum, and unspoken endurance that Black women in public life have carried like armor and baggage in equal measure. For older viewers who have lived through these shifting eras of American politics, from the civil rights movement to the culture wars of today, this wasn't just political theater. It was a full-circle moment, a test, a reflection, a reminder that no matter how far some people rise, there will always be others waiting to drag them back down with a single weaponized word. What made the insult sting more wasn't just the word ghetto, it was the way it rolled out of JD's mouth. Low, almost smug, like he was tossing it out for fun, not expecting consequences, not imagining that the woman across from him had spent her entire life preparing for a moment like this. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't come from think tanks or legacy institutions. She came from South Dallas, from the kind of neighborhood JD pretends to discuss, but clearly doesn't understand. And that neighborhood, those blocks with broken sidewalks, chicken shacks, corner stores, and grandmothers who knew your business before you did, gave Jasmine her voice. It gave her that stare, the one she leveled at the camera when the insult landed. The studio was dead quiet, but the internet wasn't. Producers in the control room could already see it happening. Clip it, tag it, get it trending. But Jasmine wasn't thinking about virality. She was thinking about the little girls watching at home, the older women sipping sweet tea in their kitchens, the retired teachers who had spent their careers being called difficult just for demanding respect. She knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about them. She let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel it. Not to embarrass JD, but to let the weight of what he said hang in the air like the stink it was. Then she leaned forward, slowly, and with the calm clarity of a woman who knows exactly where she came from, she said, "I'm not surprised you said that." And the room shifted. Not the cameras, not the lights, but the room, the energy. It became her courtroom, her stage, her sanctuary. Because in that one sentence, she told every viewer, especially the seniors who have seen these battles fought in a dozen forms, that she wasn't backing down. She was stepping in. What JD didn't realize, and what a lot of men like him never realize, is that when a woman like Jasmine Crockett locks eyes with the camera, it's not to make a scene. It's to make a point. And that point doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be lived. And lived it she did. Her voice didn't rise. Her shoulders didn't tense. Her hands stayed still. She didn't flinch because she wasn't speaking to JD anymore. She was speaking to every person who'd ever been called too loud, too bold, too unrefined for rooms like this. She was speaking to every person who ever tucked their roots into a quiet corner so they wouldn't make others uncomfortable. She was speaking for them. And what she said next, well, that's when everything changed. Jasmine Crockett didn't need the host's permission. She didn't wait for the moderator to regain composure or glance at the production team scrambling in their earpieces. She didn't check her notes or ask to go back to her talking points. She looked directly into the camera like it was an old friend. Her face didn't twitch. Her lips didn't curl. Her voice came low, calm, and deliberate. The kind of deliberate that doesn't come from training, but from experience. The kind of tone that has been passed down through generations of women who had to learn the art of restraint when the room was burning. "I'm not surprised you said that," she began again, voice steady. "Because every time a black woman speaks with conviction, with truth, with backbone, we're called something. Angry, aggressive, loud, and now, ghetto." The word hung there, echoed. She didn't flinch as she said it. She put it in the center of the table like a challenge, and then stepped back to let everyone look at it. JD Vance shifted in his seat. Not much, just enough to show that the gravity of the moment had finally arrived, that he was no longer sparring with a fellow panelist. He was now sitting in the presence of something bigger than him. A reckoning. "You hear ghetto," Jasmine continued, "but I hear South Dallas. I hear survival. I hear Saturday mornings with my grandmother rolling her hair on the porch while reading scripture out loud. I hear my mama working back-to-back shifts and still making time for Sunday dinners and PTA meetings with a tired smile and dignity you can't buy." She placed her hands on the table, fingers spread like roots. "When you say ghetto, you're not just talking about me. You're talking about every kid who ever walked to school through cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences. You're talking about every woman who raised a family on hope, coupons, and faith. You're talking about my entire community, and you're doing it with a grin like it's clever." The host didn't speak. The other panelists stayed frozen. No one moved. "You said it casually," Jasmine went on, "like it was just part of the rhythm, like it belonged there, like I was supposed to just accept it and move on. But that's the thing, Senator. I'm not moving on. I'm moving through. And I'm bringing every person you tried to erase with me." There was a pause, not the awkward kind, the holy kind, the kind of silence where people hold their breath because they feel something important happening. Not trending, not viral, just true. "I didn't come here to be respected by you," she said, "because I don't need your approval to validate my experience. I came here to speak for the people who don't get to sit at this table, and I don't mean hypothetically. I mean the girls watching from East Baltimore and Southside Chicago and West Philly who know exactly what that word means when a man like you says it. And I want them to see that you don't get the last word." JD tried to interject, half a breath, a raised hand, but the moderator held up a hand without speaking, as if to say, "Let her finish. Let her teach." "You want to reduce me to a slur?" Jasmine asked. "Go ahead. But understand this. Every time you say ghetto, I'll make sure the world hears resilient. Every time you say angry, I'll make sure they hear informed. And every time you try to shrink me, I will expand beyond what your words can reach." She adjusted her mic again, not for show, just to catch her breath, and then she delivered the final blow. "So no, Senator Vance, I'm not ghetto. I'm grounded. I'm grown. I'm galvanized. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not my tone that's the problem. It's your tolerance. The moderator finally exhaled. JD Vance was pale. Viewers at home were already clipping the moment, captioning it, sharing it like gospel. But Jasmine wasn't done for theatrics. She wasn't angling for applause. She was claiming ground that should have never been taken from her to begin with. She turned slightly, looked at the host, and said, "We can get back to the policy now. Steal." And just like that, she re-entered the discussion like nothing happened. Because for her, it hadn't been a detour. It had been the point. That word, ghetto. It didn't shock her. Not really. She had heard it too many times before, often from men with smoother voices and less public platforms. But every time it landed, it did so with the weight of something ancient, something that went beyond slurs and into survival. For Jasmine, it wasn't just a word. It was a doorway. She remembered the first time she heard it, not in anger, not even in school. It came from a substitute teacher in the 4th grade, said with a smile that curled at the corners like it knew something you didn't. She'd spoken up during a classroom discussion, challenged a worksheet that claimed Martin Luther King's work was complete, and the sub chuckled, called her ghetto fabulous, said it like it was a compliment. But Jasmine knew better, even then. That smile told the truth that the words didn't. She came home that afternoon and told her mama, Marlene Crockett didn't storm the school. She didn't call the district. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked Jasmine square in the eye and said, "Next time, say it louder, and make sure they remember it." From that day on, Jasmine wore that phrase like a scar, visible only when you looked close, but never really gone. She took it into high school, where she spoke just a little faster than the girls around her, where she read courtroom dramas instead of gossip blogs, where boys teased her for using big words, and teachers praised her only when she translated those words into something more palatable. And later, in debate club, when she argued her way into nationals, it was the same dynamic all over again. Smart, yes, but also intense. Too passionate. Borderline hostile. That was the coded feedback from one of the judges, after she demolished a prep school kid from Connecticut who couldn't handle her rebuttal. She kept going. She got sharper. But the labels followed. In law school, at Texas Southern, it showed up again. This time from classmates who didn't know her story, didn't know South Dallas, but knew the look in her eyes. Professors who asked her to moderate her tone during oral arguments. Peers who called her a firebrand when she spoke up in student forums. Recruiters who smiled tight-lipped when she said she wanted to be a public defender, not join a private firm. But she didn't flinch then either, because she remembered what her mama told her. Say it louder. Make sure they remember it. After graduation, she didn't chase prestige. She chased purpose. Her first job was in a cramped, underfunded public defender's office in Shreveport, Louisiana. It didn't come with a window or a nameplate. The AC rattled louder than the copier. But that's where she learned how the law actually lived, where she sat across from mothers in threadbare cardigans and teenagers whose records were longer than their resumes. She showed up early, stayed late, drove to court in a second-hand Honda with bald tires. She spoke fast and clear, no time for pleasantries. Judges noticed, prosecutors noticed, clients noticed, most of all. And not one of them ever called her ghetto, because when she walked in, they saw the storm in her heels. Still, no matter how high she climbed, the word always found a way back. The first time it came from a fellow politician. She was already a freshman Congresswoman. It wasn't said on air, of course. It came in the hallway in a whisper from a colleague who mistook proximity for familiarity. He said it like a joke. She didn't laugh. He said, "Don't be so ghetto about this." She stared at him, said nothing, but in her head, she wrote the whole speech she'd give one day. When it mattered, when it was public, when it wasn't just for her. And now, on that stage, under those lights, with the world watching, that day had come. That was why she hadn't flinched. That was why her voice hadn't cracked. Because that moment had been rehearsed 100 times in her heart, shaped by the sound of her mama's church shoes on tile, by the creak of school bus seats, by the echoes of community center halls where she learned how to say hard things in a soft voice. To the audience at home, her clapback sounded effortless. But what they didn't see was the staircase it was built on. She climbed that staircase every time she refused to back down, every time she was told to dress differently, speak differently, be less of herself so she could be more of what made others comfortable. And now, finally, she had turned all that pressure into a diamond. And the man who threw the word at her, he didn't even realize what he had handed her: a platform, a purpose, a path back into the hearts of every woman, every elder, every community that had been called ghetto and made to feel like that was a curse. She flipped it, not with fury, but with grace. And grace? That's something J.D. Vance never saw coming. The segment ended. Not with a bang, not even with a proper outro. Just the camera pulling wide as the moderator stumbled through a pivot to commercial, trying to salvage what little normalcy he could from what had just unfolded. The panel guests shuffled papers and exchanged stiff nods, but Jasmine didn't move. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, her mic still clipped, her expression unreadable. J.D. Vance looked straight ahead, eyes glassy, lips pursed as if realizing only now the scale of the wildfire he had sparked. By the time Jasmine reached her green room, the fire had already left the studio. Her phone buzzed like it was possessed. 30 missed calls, dozens of texts, notifications flying in like hailstones. On Twitter, her name was trending in 6 cities. The clip was already online, edited, subtitled, slowed down, synced with music, transformed into everything from gospel remixes to fiery TikTok reaction threads. But she didn't touch her phone, not yet. She sat alone on the couch and stared at the floor for a full minute, not in shock, not in pain, but in deep, careful consideration. Because Jasmine knew that viral fame was a double-edged sword, and once the internet got a hold of your words, they stopped being yours. She needed to breathe before she watched herself become a symbol. Outside, a staffer knocked. "Congresswoman, the car's ready." She stood, straightened her blazer, and left the building like a storm just starting to settle. In the back seat of the black SUV, she finally looked at her screen. Messages flooded in. From Black women in law. "You spoke for us." From teachers, "We played your clip in class." From strangers, "I cried watching you." And also from the other side, slurs, dog whistles, Fox News headlines, right-wing blogs frothing at the mouth, calling her dramatic, emotional, dangerous. They clipped the insult out entirely, painted her response as unprovoked. But it didn't matter, because people had seen the whole thing. They had watched J.D. Vance say the word. They had watched her not just survive it, but rise above it. And they weren't letting go. By nightfall, the clip had passed 3 million views. A pastor in Mississippi played it during Bible study. A youth group leader in Oakland printed her quote and handed it out on index cards. A civil rights archive requested the full transcript for preservation. But Jasmine didn't post a thing. She didn't tweet, didn't go live, didn't draft a statement. Because she knew this wasn't a moment to celebrate. It was a fault line, a fracture, a mirror being held up to the country. By day 2, pundits debated it on every channel. One panelist said, "Maybe she overreacted." Another said, "Maybe he didn't mean it like that." But they were missing the point entirely. Jasmine hadn't reacted. She had responded with the weight of every time that word was used to silence brilliance, to camouflage prejudice, to rob women of their complexity. A retired judge in Atlanta wrote a letter to the editor. What she did wasn't political theater. It was testimony. On day 3, J.D. Vance issued a statement, hollow, sanitized. "I regret that my comment caused offense." Not that he said it, not that it reflected anything about who he is, just that it caused offense, like someone had tripped over a rug instead of throwing a brick through a window. Jasmine's office declined to comment, but the silence only made her louder. In Houston, a teacher led a writing assignment titled, "What labels have you outgrown?" In Detroit, a grandmother sent Jasmine a handwritten letter. "You walked with your head high. That's all we ever wanted for our girls." In Tallahassee, a youth basketball coach paused practice and gathered his players around a phone saying, "Watch how she didn't raise her voice. That's how you command a room." No press release could match that reach. No campaign ad could buy that kind of power. And behind it all, Jasmine just kept moving. She met with constituents, voted on legislation, prepared for committee hearings. Because she knew the moment was hot, but the movement would be long. She wasn't interested in milking the moment. She was interested in changing the momentum. The calls for interviews came in. Big platforms, morning shows, late-night anchors. She said no to almost all of them, until one local station in Dallas called. She accepted. Not because it was flashy, but because it was home. The anchor asked, "Congresswoman, you've become a viral icon. How does that feel?" Jasmine paused, then answered, "It feels like pressure. It feels like responsibility. It feels like everything my mama taught me when she didn't have a microphone, but her words still reached." That quote made it to a New York Times headline, but she didn't care about that either. What she cared about was the email she got that night from a woman named Clarice in Cincinnati. It came with a picture, a 12-year-old girl holding a piece of paper with Jasmine's quote scribbled in marker, "You hear ghetto, I hear South Dallas." The girl had used it for her class speech. She called it the power of words. Jasmine read the message twice, then she finally exhaled, because that was the moment she knew she hadn't just clapped back. She had cracked something open. And the world wasn't rushing to close it. Weeks passed. The frenzy cooled. The hashtags faded. The headlines shifted to new scandals, new debates. But the memory of that night, that word, that stare into the camera, that unflinching calm, lingered. Not in the halls of the Capitol where it all began, but in the quieter places, in classrooms, in barbershops, in family group chats, and kitchen table conversations. Jasmine Crockett hadn't posted a follow-up. She hadn't gone on a press tour. She hadn't weaponized the moment. She had simply gone back to work. But behind closed doors, the invitations kept coming. "Return to the show," the email read. "Same format, same panel. J.D. Vance has confirmed." Her team hesitated. "You don't owe them anything," one advisor said. "This isn't your burden to carry twice." But Jasmine read the invite twice. Then she picked up the phone and called her mother. "You going back?" Marlene asked. "I think I have to," Jasmine said quietly. Her mother didn't respond with advice, just 5 words. "Say it the way you do." When Jasmine returned to that studio, the air was different, not tense, charged. Like the building itself remembered what had happened the last time. Viewers tuned in early. Comments flooded live feeds. Some came to see fireworks, others came for healing. Everyone came expecting a moment. This time, the topic was housing policy. The moderators did their best to keep things structured. They started with numbers, legislation, projections. J.D. Vance played it safe. At first, he quoted reports, kept his tone neutral, but the discomfort in his body language gave him away. Every time Jasmine spoke, he leaned back, shifted, adjusted his cuffs like they were getting tighter. Halfway through the segment, he cracked. "Look," J.D. said, interrupting her mid-sentence, "I'm sure your community cares, Congresswoman, but I don't think turning this into an emotional issue helps anyone." There it was, not the word from last time, but the same intention, the same quiet condescension. Jasmine paused, just like before. But this time, she smiled, and that smile didn't say, "You got me." It said, "You still haven't learned." She leaned in, voice smooth as ever. "You think it's emotional because you've never had to live next to a payday loan shop and a liquor store instead of a grocery store. You think it's emotional because you've never sat across from a mother holding an eviction notice in one hand and her son's report card in the other. You call it emotion. I call it lived experience." The room went still. J.D. blinked. The host tried to interject but couldn't find the words. Jasmine kept going. "I don't raise my voice because I don't have to. When your life has been a battle, you learn to speak like a general. And my community? We've fought long enough to deserve more than silence dressed up as civility." The clip hit the internet before the commercial break, but this time, the reaction was different. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every woman who had held her tongue to keep a job, every teacher who had been called aggressive for holding a student accountable, every mother who had been told her standards were too much. A mother in Atlanta wrote, "I played that clip for my daughters. They stood taller after." A college student in Kansas tweeted, "This is how you bring facts and fire at the same time. Crockett is the real deal." And the same girl from Cincinnati? She updated her class poster, added a new quote, "Speak like a general." Back in her office, Jasmine watched none of it. She was drafting new housing legislation, reviewing school funding gaps, meeting with constituents. But when her assistant handed her a letter from a high school student in Tulsa, she paused. The letter said, "I never liked civics class until I saw you speak. Now I want to be like you, because you didn't yell, you didn't cry, you just didn't shrink." Jasmine folded the letter, placed it next to her notes, and sat quietly for a moment. She hadn't gone back for JD. She had gone back for the record. And she had left it louder than ever. Jasmine Crockett didn't win that panel because she clapped back harder. She won because she stood firmer, because she carried her past not like a wound, but like armor, because she turned a slur into a sermon and then returned to the same room, not to reclaim her place, but to remind them she never left. And for every elder who sat quietly through their own battles, every grandchild being raised to know better, every voter wondering if character still counts, Jasmine's voice reached them. It said, "You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to break the room to change it. Just speak, stand, stay." So, if you've ever been told your truth was too much, or your roots too rough, or your voice too loud to belong, remember Jasmine Crockett. And if you believe there's power in speaking softly with steel in your spine, like this video, drop a comment, and hit subscribe. Because some clapbacks aren't about revenge, they're about legacy. And Jasmine, she's just getting started.